Dark Satellite Media.
Yes. Thank you for hanging out with us. Your resume is almost a little overwhelming. Like, you've done so much stuff. And what I really wanted to ask you is just how it all started. Like, how did you get into writing? How did you get into the love of movies? And then we'll cover some of the things that you've done and some of the things that you're working on now.
Sure. Well, for me, it's the classic, certainly of my generation. It's the classic story about loving movies as a kid, cutting school and going to the movies and sneaking into the movie theater, I think. But it was, fortunately, I often look back on this. Growing up, we had, because television was in the 50s when I was a kid and early 60s, but mostly in the 50s. In the late 50s, television, was starting to grow, getting really big, and everybody was getting a TV set, and they needed more and more product and more product. And the best thing that they found to eat up time to put things on the air were movies. And movies were I just adored them. I loved what they were. I think I always knew that I wanted to write. Even before I was confident that I wanted to write movies, I was writing poetry. I was writing short stories, even as a kid. Some of the kids in school were also writing little stories, and they were of a sexual nature, and they were selling them in these little black composition notebooks for like 10 cents a story. And I thought, this is a good career. This can work. So
yeah.
So I started getting fascinated by it, and I came in a good place in a national poetry contest. And I was printed in the magazine, in the book that they put out for the best poetry from all school ages. And I made it into that book for the whole country. So I was writing early on. As time went on a little bit further, when I went into junior high school, there was a little theater. There were like 4 theaters in my neighborhood, and Danny's father, who was my dearest friend in those days, he and I hung out a lot. And when I was in those early days, there were like 4 movie theaters that we used to go to all the time. But one of them was a little tiny, wonderful theater. It was called the Empress. And I think I've read Scorsese stories and Spielberg stories and all of them. And they all have the same experience. We all found this little theater that showed old movies. And I used to cut school all the time and try and sneak into the movies during the day. And I would watch all this. And I mean, it was just to sit down in that theater and just be able to, being transported into another world. It was mostly movies that I'd probably already seen on television because the theater wasn't getting really good stuff. They were just getting some of the old movies. And I remember how many times I must have seen Audie Murphy's To Hell and Back. How many times I must have seen a couple of John Wayne movies. I certainly, every time they had a Walk in the Sun, I would fly to it. That's one of the greatest war movies ever made. And it's pure art and pure poetry, and it is magnificent. And it starred Dana Andrews, and it is a spectacular, wonderful movie about one little squad on one little mission. And yet you learn everything you need to know about the soldier's life during wartime.
So it consumed you, basically. Like, you watch these movies, and like it was such an impression for you at an early age. Same thing for like us. Like, we love movies, music more for me, obviously, because I didn't get into writing movies. But so I love that. So you go in, and what was the experience like back then in a movie theater compared to decades later? Like, what was it like back then?
Well, you're talking about this theater, which was basically my central theater when I was growing up, because I got to watch all these old movies and basically classic commercial movies. It gave me a taste for movies. The most influential period of my life was just after that, when I discovered that also in the general area of where I lived, there was an art house that actually had movies that were quite substantial, and foreign films with subtitles and all kinds of things that were much more serious. And I remember seeing movies like, I think it was Stuart Whitman and Rod Steiger did a movie, I think, called The Mark, about a pedophile.
Wow.
It was very, very groundbreaking in those days.
I bet. Yeah.
And nobody went to see that one. And I saw that. I know I saw HUD in its initial stages at that theater, because just to see, Paul Newman as a modern day cowboy was just absolute wonderful. So I got to see much more serious films, and I broke away from my normal group of friends because I was interested in those kinds of movies. And I began to realize that that's what I wanted to do. Seeing those movies were seminal experiences, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so I started writing things, not screenplays, but I started writing plays. And my first instinct was I wanted to be a playwright. And so I went from writing poetry to going to the movies, and knowing literally from the time I was 12 that what I wanted to do for my life was write.
Awesome.
And so I went from that into writing plays, and I had then what I would say probably is the most seminal experience for me. I was a bad kid because I was doing all that cutting, and I got into some other trouble.
Yeah.
I was taken out of my home, and I was put into a reform school, and the reform school was in upstate New York. And then from that reform school, I went to, after they figured you're going to be okay, they sent me to a halfway house in New York City, and the halfway house was on the Lower East Side, and it was in Greenwich, basically just at the edge of Greenwich Village. And I went to work in that place. I went to school in the halfway house where they watched you 24/7. But I was
what time period in New York are you talking about?
This was like Greenwich Village. This was like 9th Street and St. Mark's Place.
Wow, nice.
Near 2nd Avenue on the east side.
Yeah.
The Lower East Side.
So what year? Like what decade
we're
we
talking about? I'm saying this must be 60. I would say 61, 60, 62 maybe.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
because
exciting time down there.
I know I was going to Seward Park High School. The way I can remember is I know I was going to Seward Park High School, and I was coming home on the bus on the day JFK was shot. So that's November 22nd, 1963.
Wow.
It was an emotional day, but nonetheless, I was at that place. I was at the edge of the village, and the first thing that really changed my life was that I got to work with somebody that I knew at this place, which we nicknamed the Club. He was an actor and a kind of producer, and he came and he basically donated time to those of us who were in this reform, this halfway house, wanting to give us, here's what you can do with life. You don't necessarily have to go out and work in a cafeteria or be a mechanic or something like that. You can have another life, maybe even a life in the arts. So he was peddling that world for us and talking about acting and theater and so forth. And he belonged to a theater group which became truly legendary and very famous, called the Living Theater. It was run by a guy named Julian Beck and Judith Molina. Julian Beck, in later years in the movies, he was in a lot of horror films. He was a wonderful, wonderful actor. They were great actors, but they did some very serious plays. Man is Man. They did a lot of Bertolt Brecht. They did a few others I remember, but they became famous for doing things like, the biggest play was a thing called The Connection. Have you ever heard of it? Shirley Clarke made a film of them and shot it down at the Living Theater. And it was a bunch of drug addicts who were ruminating and sitting around in a room, and they're pontificating about life, and they're waiting for their fix to come. A guy was going to come with shots for them and a fix for them, and they're all just waiting. It's like waiting for Godot. So they're waiting for the guy that doesn't show up.
Well, the guy you mentioned, real quick, I just want to say he was in Poltergeist too.
That's right. He was. That's right.
So
Julian was in Poltergeist.
Yeah, he was like a very horrifying, like he played a very scary guy in that movie. But go ahead, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. He was in Poltergeist, and I think he did subsequent movies along those lines, because he had such an incredibly terrifying presence, you know?
Yeah, it was for a kid. Yeah, I was 8, and then he
Oh
scared
yeah,
the shit out of
that
me.
was nightmare fuel. Yeah.
He was freaking great. He was
Yeah.
absolutely wonderful. And trust me, a hell of an actor. But he staged and directed some of these plays. And the big one was The Connection, which Shirley Clark filmed about these drug addicts. And the idea was that they were all addicts waiting to get their fix. The wonderful thing about it was it broke the fourth wall. And it became in New York a legend, because during the course of the play, when they broke for the second act, when they're doing all their talking and waiting for their connection to come, the actors literally came out off the stage and into the audience, and they bummed money.
Oh wow, that's good.
People gave them money because they really were, drug addicts. That you were convinced that you were watching the real thing.
Yeah.
The guy that I knew who came to the club, he played the producer, and he said, "I'm gathering these people." He would come to the front of the audience. He came from the back of the audience. He would come sit on the stage, and he said, I'm here just to introduce these guys because I wanted to get them together so you could see what life of a drug addict is really like. And a wonderful actor named Warren Finnerty, I will never forget Warren. I think he was one of the great actors of all time. He played Leash, which is the main character in that movie. He later played in Easy Rider. He played the farmer, where Fonda first stops and says, "Oh, I like your farm here," and all that stuff. Leach was a wonderful, wonderful actor. And anyway, so
Panic in Needle Park.
Pardon me?
Panic in Needle Park too.
Panic in Needle Park. I think you'll also find that Warren Finnerty was also in a Hatful of Rain. That he played one of the henchmen in a Hatful of Rain.
It's amazing. All these people that you encountered, like everything that you guys.
It was fascinating. So
New York in the 60s.
I love New York in the 60s. It was great. So we did that, and then the producer in the second act, the drug addicts pull them up on stage and say, "Okay, you want to see what it's like? Okay, you're telling these people what it's like? Yeah, let me show you what it's like." And they shove a needle in his arm. The audience screams because he's suddenly being shot with heroin, and they totally freaking bought it. And I go like, "This is great."
Yeah, that's so cool.
So and then he he stumbles around. He's getting his first high on heroin. So it was a great play. I think it ultimately, if I'm not mistaken, The Connection, I may have won like a Pulitzer or something like that. I'm not sure what it may have won some awards, but it was a great play. So they did that play. I started to hang out there with this producer, Julian Beck and Judith Molina, became friends with me, and they put on weekend plays for kids. And I decided to write something for it. And I wrote something which I think I called, if I remember correctly, it was my first real play, and I called it The Island. And it was kind of like a Mark Twain, Huck Finn thing about some island in the Mississippi, where an African-American kid, a black kid, and a white kid are both, who don't like each other, are both trapped on this island after a flood. And they decided to put it on for a couple of Sundays. So that was my first experience in seeing something produced, and I go like, I got to do this more often.
Yeah, that's amazing. Especially because a lot of people do want to get into movies. They do want to get in the arts and stuff but no one ever really sticks with it. So to like watch people like you, at an early age where you're like, this is what I want to do. And this is what you've done your whole career. So, but yeah.
Well, if there's any lesson that I've learned and any lesson that I would impart to others, it is, you got to do it. You can't wait for it to happen to you. You got to do it. For me, it was easy because of what it meant. What you got to do is write. And I go through in the younger days, I went to the stage, and a lot of young writers, I'm sure it's still the same, where you get a great idea, you start to write, and you never finish anything. But you're telling people, "Oh, I'm working on this great play about, Noah and the Ark and this and that and the next thing." And you love to talk about it. And you may read a scene or a couple of lines of dialogue from it. You want the buzz and the high of being able to talk about it, but you can't somehow push yourself through the drudgery of it to get to that point where you type the 6 magic letters, THEEND. That's very difficult. Fade out is.
You got to do the work.
Pardon me?
You got to do the work.
You got to do the work. So I did that play, and it was a great experience. I think that had a profound impact on my life, and it made a decision. I had been left back in school because I was taken out of reform school. I had had a terrible career. I was a really bad student. I went to Carnegie Tech, and then I came back to New York. The first thing that I did was I looked for a job writing, and I wanted to be doing commercials and TV commercials and things like that. And I got a job at a company that did movie advertising first. So I actually got a job to go to the movies almost every day, see a movie, and then write the greatest spectacle with guns, babes, and machine guns than you've ever seen in your life. And I got to write those kind of movie ads.
Yeah.
And I wrote things like, there was a re-release of HUD, one of the movie I told you about.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote a line like, HUD, he was the man with the barbed wire soul. And my favorite, which became very significant in New York, when Clint first came out with A Fistful of Dollars, I went on a rainy Monday morning. They asked me to go to, I think it was United Artists building or whatever it is, and there was a screening room in the basement. And I said, go catch this. This movie's making a lot of money in Europe, and and the United Artists picked it up, and they're gonna release the Western and all that. And so just go write something, pick it out and go watch it, and then give us a couple of lines.
Yeah.
And lines for those movies in those days were like, look at all the guns and the bullets and the babes and the money, and so it was very simple to write. And then more killings than you could shake a stick at.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I went to see this, and I was like, the minute it started, I said, "That's Yojimbo, folks. That's Yojimbo, right?"
Yeah.
So you go like that. So Kurosawa said, Yojimbo was an Eastern Western. And I looked at this movie and I said, this movie is a Western Eastern. And so I look at it and I realized it was different. It was nothing, no Western had ever been like that one before. It was provocative. It was awesome. It was to see it, like the first one to see it in America. It was a thrill and a half. And I go like, this is really great. You can't just release this movie like a piece of junk. This is special. So I went back to the company I worked for. It's called Diener, Hauser and Greenthal. And I went back to them and I said, you can't just write the same old crap for this thing. This thing is really special.
Oh, wow. That's so cool. Yeah. So it felt like completely special and different to you. Yeah. So
very different. And they said, well, all right, spend a day on it, but no more than that, Yeah. And I go and I sat down with the art director and we started talking through the movie, he didn't see it, but I did. And I started explaining things. And then I realized that during the course of that movie, they never call him anything. He's Blondie, he's the tall man, he's the fast gun, but they don't give him a name. So I said to the art director, well, why don't we just call this guy the man with no name? And then the theme line I came up with was the man with no name and adventure will never be the same. So I ended up doing that line. And then there was something about, I convinced them that all these Western, these commercial action films always had a lot of artwork and very few lines, no text. The less anybody had to read, the better, because there are people who go to those movies didn't read text, so they didn't want any words on it. And I said, just reverse, treat this like an art movie.
Yeah.
And I said, take Clint and with his big serape, and I wrote literally hundreds of words that read like what we call a reader ad, where you saw a lot of text, a lot of copy across his serape. And I wrote purple prose like, danger fits him like his tight black glove. Death swirls around him like the smoke from his cheap cigar. He's the man with no name, and once you meet him, adventure will never be the same.
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff. And they said, well, we like it, but you got to go and convince United Artists. And I said, gladly. So I went and I talked, and that title itself, The Man with No Name, it kind of stuck, for the selling of that movie. And in fact, in the other subsequent movies, they said the man with no name is back, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so it's kind of like early taglines, basically, for like the
early tagline stuff. And I really had a great time doing that. So I did movies like that. Then I did some real advertising, and somewhere along the line, maybe a year, I went to Benton & Bowles and did some television commercials. I forget where it was, like in an area called the Four Corners, which I think is the only place in the United States. I think it was Denver. I went to Denver. I think it's the only place in the United States where 4 states touch each other.
Okay.
And
Oh,
there
you're right.
was
Yeah,
an
yeah.
article when we were leaving finished shooting the commercial. There was an article in a newspaper that said it was like the 50th or anniversary or whatever it was of the very last Indian uprising in the United States. And I stayed and I looked at the article and I went to the newspaper and I asked to talk to some of the writers that were there or newspapermen. And it was a fascinating story about an Indian. And I just fell in love with it. So about a week later, I stayed in Denver for a while. I came back to work and I said, I'm leaving. And I quit to write my first full movie screenplay, which I called The Day the Indian Beat St. Louis, because this Indian was basically framed for a murder and then taken for trial in St. Louis. And it was a wonderful, true story. I really liked it. So I wrote that script, and that was my first one. And I had a great time writing it. It was filled with all kinds of flaws that your first full screenplay would be filled with.
Oh yeah, I would imagine for sure. Like
sure.
anything, yeah.
And all kinds of
Yeah.
terrible junk in it.
But
it
when you look back at it now, do you still feel that way?
I love the idea of the story, and I think the characters were pretty good. It was, I put a reporter in it that was really interesting. I got a producer, a really successful producer, a guy named Elliot Kastner, who produced, a little movie like Where Eagles Dare. Elliot saw that script and he loved it, and he bought it, or he optioned it, and he got it to, one of the most exciting days of my life, followed by one of the most heartbreaking days of my life. At that moment, it was Jaws had opened, and it was an enormously successful movie somewhere around that time. And Elliot got to Richard Dreyfuss and Roy Scheider, and here were the guys, two guys in the biggest movie in the world. And Scheider wanted to play the Indian, and Dreyfuss wanted to play the reporter. And I go, it's my first damn screenplay, and they want to be in it. They want to be in this movie. I said, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened on Earth.
Yeah.
And Elliot, who was always a dreamer, said, "Oh, they're good, but I can get Nicholson and Brando." So he was determined to get Nicholson and Brando. So he passed on the two of them, which broke my heart. And then it was all kinds of crazy complications. But it opened the door for me, and that movie started me. The fact that it was a decent script got me around to other people. I got another producer involved and said, "What do you want to do?" And I said I had read something in Variety that said that Dustin Hoffman was looking for a movie. And I went like, how could this guy, who was now the hottest thing, how could he be looking for a movie? And so I said, I kind of, we didn't have Google or anything in those days, but I just looked around and read stuff, and he had never played a cop. So I said, well, I'd like to do a story about him being a cop. And I said I would base it on one of the experiences I had while I was biking around the country, and where a motorcycle cop was gunned down from the back of a Volkswagen bus in Phoenix. So I said, I'll write a script about it. And I wrote the script, which I called Electroglide in Blue. Lo and behold, the head of United Artists got a hold of the script and decided he was going to make it. So literally the second script I ever wrote became a major studio feature film.
I gotta recommend that movie too to anybody who hasn't seen it. I watched it on Prime. It's up on Prime, Amazon Prime, and I was really blown away. Very John Ford-esque, kind of got a Western feel to it. If you're a fan of No Country for Old Men later days, like I got a vibe of that. Like obviously this was preceding it, but very epic film. I read somewhere, I don't know if it's accurate, were they behind schedule shooting that, and they took out a bunch of dialogue about a love story? Well, and if that's true, like, how does that make you feel as a writer if something gets pulled out?
I thought that was terrible. Now, the truth of the matter is, it's not that they were behind schedule. Mm-hmm. The guy, there was a very important producer, a music producer, whose name is James William Guercio, who produced a small group called Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
So so obviously the studio wanted to be in business with this guy. They wanted his music. They wanted something to do with Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago. He was the producer because he got a hold of the script, and he's the one that got it to United Artists. And he's the one. Actually, it was because the reason he picked it up was because he was at William Morris, and the original title of the script was Pig, because that's what we called cops in those days.
Yeah.
Pig. So the original title of the script was Pig, and he automatically picked that up because he saw it on a desk, and he read it and he loved it, and then he got it to one of the executives at United Artists. Anyway, he was the producer, and he forced out the guy who was directing it so he could take over direction of the film himself. And the studio obviously backed him because he had Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago.
Peter Cetera's in the film too, isn't he? I think, yeah.
And
Speaking of Chicago.
So he took over. What he wanted to do was he decided that he wanted to have more action, more chase in it, and a bigger chase sequence after the movie was done. The love story had been shot. It was there, and I saw it with the more complete love story, because the love story was the girl that Blake rescues at that commune becomes a love affair that helps it change his mind about kids.
Right.
So that was totally eliminated from the movie, and they actually filmed it. They had it, and the girl was pretty good. She was an attractive girl. I forget her name, but she was pretty good. So they had it, but Garcia decided he wanted, he was obviously impacted by Bullet. He was obviously impacted by French Connection. So he said, I want to have a big chase. And the studio said, well, we've spent enough on this already, and so we're not going to give you that much. And he said, I'll pay for it. So basically, he then eliminated the love story and went back to do a bunch of shooting for that big chase sequence at the end with Blake and Billy Greenbush's bike gets knocked out from under him. Blake knocks it out, and then they blow up another bike, and then they ride over people, and it was just total mayhem. But it wasn't that they just cut it out because of anything else other than the fact that producer who had now become a director, it was because he wanted to have a big action sequence.
Gotcha.
And he did it on his own, so he had to cut something from the movie.
Great film.
And the person who made it, there are two people who really made that movie. One cannot fault, Blake was a very crucial figure into the direction of the movie. He knew what he could do. He knew how to shoot him. He was the de facto director of that movie, and he worked really hard, put it together. And the other person that was really wonderful and an artist, there's no peer, was Conrad Hall, who was the cinematographer. This is one of the greatest cinematographers America has ever had and produced. And he was, you look at his movies, you'll see that they're just extraordinary. All the President's Men or whatever it is, and Tequila Sunrise, and you can go on and on and on and on. They're great movies.
Yeah, Tequila Sunrise. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so Connie Hall is a true artist. So together, with them and James and Curcio and all of that, they put together a terrific looking movie that is, I've seen it recently, and it holds up to anything that's photographed today. Its imagery is as contemporary as anything that's photographed today. Yeah. So it was truly a wonderful piece of work. So now I had my first movie produced, and after that, then I started staying in New York to try and do some work in New York. I found a little bit, but I ended up coming out to California more and more often because there was more going on. I ended up working with wonderful things like Richard Pryor on Some Kind of Hero, and Dan Akroyd.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Those two Michael Pressman movies. So it was Some Kind of Hero, and then Dr. Detroit. So you did some script writing for that. So can you give us a little bit on those two movies? Because one was 82. Well, Hero was 82. Dr. Detroit was 83, and it was the same director. So obviously you guys knew each other.
Do you go into that knowing you're going to be writing for these two of the most unique comic voices in American history? Like, you're going to be writing for Pryor, or you've already had written that?
It didn't work quite that way. What happened was I had been playing around with a couple of storylines Paramount knew me very well, and I'd done one of the polishes. I was working on 48 Hours,
Oh wow.
which was for Eddie Murphy. So
Yeah.
Paramount knew me as somebody who could do kind of a little bit of hip action, a little bit of hip dialogue, and a little bit of fun. So they kind of liked that. I worked for a while with Burt Reynolds, who was going to be in 48 Hours.
Wow. Was he really?
Really?
Oh, it was going to be Burt Reynolds. Yeah, I worked with Burt. It was
Instead of Nolte?
Yeah. It started off a different.
That's crazy.
The movie
Wow.
went through a bunch of gestations. It's which they all do, but it started off where basically I went down to Paramount. Knew me because of I had been trying to do some things, and I'd come in there on several occasions, and so they knew me about some of these projects that I was working on. We went to Jupiter, Florida, where Burt Reynolds was, and Burt was attached to 48 Hours, and the original story was going to involve a sheriff who had a pet tiger, by the way. So and lived his own kind of life, and Burt, liked being in Florida and in Jupiter and all that stuff. And he wanted to play this character, and we started to play around with the script, and then we did some things that they kind of liked. And then Burt was out, as I remember correctly, and then for whatever the reasons were, it may have been Burt. I don't know what it was, but all I know was the script went away for a while, disappeared. And then the next thing you know, it came back, and now they had Eddie Murphy, who was coming off of Saturday Night Live, and Nick Nolte, and it totally changed. So it was no longer, about obviously not about a cop with a tiger and living in Florida.
Yeah.
So it completely changed, and so they asked me to work on that for a bit, which I did, but at a certain point, after meeting Walter, the job for me was they said. Walt said, you take the scene on page 27, the scene on page 53, the scene on page 96, and you fix those, and I'll fix these. And for me, as a writer, I'm one of those guys who just, I needed to get the sense of the whole thing. I couldn't write something if I didn't know what was going on page 27.
Yeah.
So I said, I can't do this, and I can't give it justice. And so I didn't end up finishing off on 48 Hours. I had become familiar with them because I met people at Paramount, and I met a guy named Howard Koch on a couple of the projects that had to do with African American stories, and he suggested that I meet with Richard and with Michael, who had been assigned to do some kind of hero.
Okay.
So that was an assignment, and I met them, and I got along very well with Michael, and Richard. I adored. I mean, I just absolutely adored him. I had seen his comedy from the early days, and so I'd absolutely fallen in love with him, and we got along pretty well. And then I asked. He asked United Paramount to have me come out to his place in Hawaii. He had a ranch in Maui, where he wanted to work on the script. So I had a wonderful experience out at his ranch in Maui. There was a little enjoyment of weed and other things. And but it was just being in the presence of him was just wonderful, and hearing some stories that he would tell, and he was great, and he really paid a lot of attention to the story. It was Michael then who, after Some Kind of Hero, got the job to do Dr. Detroit.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had already hired, or Dan Akroyd already signed on to do the picture. So I went to meet with both of them, and I thought I loved Dan Akroyd, and I thought I understood him pretty well, and it was really exciting for me just to be in a room. A couple of times I had written some scenes and some speeches that the character did. And we were over at Michael's house, and Dan picked up the pages and started to walk around and do the scene. And that was a real treat. There's nothing like being in the room with an actor, especially one of such remarkable qualities as Richard Pryor, or even Jackie Gleason or Art Carney.
Was it The Southern Lawyer?
For which one?
No, you were just talking about the scene. We were talking about before The Southern Lawyer and Dr. Detroit.
Yeah.
The one, you mean the one that Dan Akroyd did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was something about talking about. I think he did the one as the doctor.
Okay.
So he started to
Okay.
play with how that doctor was going to sound.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So he was searching for that character, and he was trying different things. So he obviously was pulling some comic bits out of his memory,
Yeah.
and he was trying different things. And it's really exciting to see an actor with that kind of skill up there playing around with your words and your scene, and trying to find who this guy should be. What is this a college professor when he has to play this vicious, Dr. Detroit? What does he think is it's not what Dan thinks, it's what this English, this professor,
Mhm.
what does he think a pimp like that should sound like? So it was great just to be in the room to watch that happen. That was a real treat and a half. So,
And you co-wrote that with Carl Gottlieb, who he had stuff to do with the
well,
Jaws.
Gottlieb came in. No, I didn't co-write it with him. I wrote it. I did a draft, a couple of drafts based on an earlier. I forget who had written the first draft, which is maybe Bruce J. Friedman. Is that it?
Oh, Bruce Friedman. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think it's Bruce Friedman. So he wrote the first draft. Then I did 2 or 3 subsequent drafts, and I wanted to do Bringing Up Baby. So I wanted to do a kind of romantic, where he now is crossing, lives to do something else and be, finding himself being something different, being a pimp. So and falling in love with a hooker at the same time. So I wanted to, it to be a kind of sprite comedy and witty and urbane in a way. And so I didn't want it to be broad slapstick. That was not what I felt comfortable with. At a certain point, they decided, United Artists, was it UA? I think it wasn't UA, it was Universal, take it back, it was Universal. Universal decided that they wanted to be more of a broad slapstick comedy for whatever the reasons were, and I don't know exactly why Carl was chosen. I mean, I think he's a terrific writer, but I don't know why he was chosen, because I don't remember the broad comedies that Carl did. I know that but he was a finisher and a polisher of Jaws, so maybe that was the reason.
Yeah, I mean, I read that he was brought into Jaws to like give it to like round out some of the characters, like you said, a finisher. And it's that aspect of the business that you guys are in is always fascinating to me, because you come up with a script and then someone else polishes a character, and then from there someone else adds the humor. I mean, I could imagine it's nice to work as a team, but sometimes also frustrating if somebody changes something that you feel very strongly about.
Look, you get used to it. I mean, I still see it even today. I'm 108 years old, but even today, you still see it. It doesn't change. The industry doesn't change. It's filled with a lot of people who think they know what they're doing, and some people who do know what they're doing, and very few people who get away with it and don't care about what they're doing. So sometimes what they want to do is bring in a specialist, which they think, now if I just get a little more comedy along this line, let me get that guy or that girl who did that kind of comedy, and I'll punch that into the script. I'll get that to work. And a producer, look, that's the nature of the beast, is that the person who shells out the money has the right to decide what direction the movie takes. Now, they may go with an actor who says, I can't make this movie without an actor, and he wants it now to be not a Western, but a story on the planet Mars. Okay, that's the way it's going to be. So that's the reality of the movie business, and you learn to live that way. You learn to accept a life which is, there are other people will always have a voice in what you do. Very rarely, unless you achieve a certain status, and some people have that. You've got wonderful, newer writers like Taylor Sheridan and stuff like that you don't mess around with what they do, because they're really great at what they do, and you can't, and these producers kind of know that you don't tell them how to write this kind of story. So in this case, I think because in Dr. Detroit, because Carl had been such an important element to the success of Jaws. They felt, that he could help, punch up, and he convinced them that he could do the comedy that they wanted. And I'm trying to think about what he changed. I think he may have created a couple of more situations for Mom to be in. In other words, use that broad character a few more times than I had it. So that may have been a big plus. So, and the Guild decided that he made enough of a contribution to get credit. So
to get credit, yeah.
He did get credit, so that's fine. So, but that was, that's what happened there. I was not, I didn't see the movie. And to be perfectly honest, in this business, it helps to be honest with yourself, if not to your producers. If they ask you to go in a certain direction and you can't do it, and it's not what you feel comfortable, why try to do it? I mean, it's never going to work out. If you're not happy when you're writing, it ain't going to work out, so they can't drag you through to do it. You just say, I know what you want, and I don't think I can give it to you.
I think this is a good segment into your direction, because the year after Dr. Detroit, you direct your first film, which is Oxford Blues. So can you, get us in there and talk about Rob Lowe, Ali Sheedy, and what that was like? I didn't know it was a remake. Was it a remake?
No, it's not really a remake. It really isn't. It is. I knew this producer. I've known him all my career. His name is Elliot Kastner, and so and he had optioned my first screenplay, and I had written other things for him over the years, and a couple of movies we liked very much, and he had come to me at one point and he said, in those days, the way that it worked with international financing, he had about $1.5 million, something like that, in England on some movie that he had made there, and he couldn't get it out of the country. He had to use it, and had to use it quickly and he had to use it to make another movie.
Okay, that's interesting.
Wow.
So he said, what can you come up with that I can shoot there? And I basically felt, well, I can do a kind of variation on a Yank at Oxford. And so I wrote a kind of variation on that. So it's not a remake by any means. And it was a variation about a guy that goes into rowing and goes to Oxford, but falls in love with a princess. He goes there seeking a princess. What happens to Robert Taylor in the Yank at Oxford is he meets somebody while he's there and gets involved in all kinds of shenanigans at Oxford. But I went there with a guy who was basically a con man, and wanted to go to meet the dream of his life, which is an English princess or royalty, what he thinks.
And
all of a sudden,
this was Rob Lowe, like a year after, like The Outsiders, and I don't remember. Obviously, I was 5 when The Outsiders came out, but so we remember it differently because to us it's such a cult film. But I don't remember. I don't know if it was ever a hit, but I know that it was. To us, it was like a big deal. You know that name.
It was a kind of a hot niche film. It wasn't a mass appeal movie, The Outsiders.
Okay.
But for a certain group and young people, it really was a very important movie, and well done.
And book, yeah.
And so Elliot said, he wanted Rob Lowe. When I wrote this character, he said he wanted Rob Lowe to play the part. So I met with Rob and I talked to him, and I thought, I thought he would be great. I thought he would be terrific in the part. And we talked about the movie and all of that stuff, and we got along very well. And so basically, Elliot put it together very quickly. I wrote the script pretty fast, and Elliot put it together very quickly. He got, let's see, he had Rob Lowe. He got Ali Sheedy. I'm pretty sure I hadn't picked up. I knew who Ali Sheedy was, but I didn't. He got a hold of her, and he got her to be in the movie. We did look at. Let's see. I can't think of anybody else. The rest of it was basically an English cast, and we talked to a lot of people over in England. It was really great to do that. And we got some wonderful English actors, and and some of them went on to some very nice careers. And
how was your shift into direction? Like, did it feel natural? Did you feel like I'm ready to do this?
To me, it was very natural. I mean, obviously there were things to learn, but it was very natural. I knew the story I wanted to tell, and I had a certain visual sense of what I was hoping for. And when I got to Oxford, I must tell you, it is the most extraordinary location.
Oh yeah, it looks it.
You cannot turn that camera around and not find a $20 million production shot. I mean, it is unbelievably spectacular, and I had a wonderful cinematographer, and the DP had been a DP on some great movies. I mean, I'm not. I don't think he was on Lawrence, but he was. I think he was like maybe on River Kwai. He was on a couple of great films, and I asked him. He was truly a great Chip Waterson, I think his name was. He's truly a master artist. And I asked him, what is it that he loved about the work that he did, having made so many great films? And I'll never forget what he said. He said, I know that I'm the first one to see the movie.
So cool. Yeah.
That is, think about those words. He's the cinematographer, he's the cameraman. He does it all, and he looks it through the lens. And he's the operator, and he sees it first.
Yeah, that's someone who loves their job a lot, and I love that.
Yeah. He loves. That's the guy who loves his job. He's terrific.
Yeah.
So I had a wonderful location to shoot at. We had remarkable imagery. I think I look at the picture. I think it's really well shot. I think it's. I look at it and I was really happy with the look of the film. Really happy.
Did you got to watch you get to watch, especially back then, you get to watch it in a movie theater with people, right? Like, what was the first time you did that?
No. I went to in LA. I went to all the theaters. A bunch of the theaters who was playing in the big theaters. No, it was exciting to see that. To see some reaction. It looked absolutely spectacular and wonderful, and I love the imagery. So that was a real treat for me. I felt very comfortable directing it. I think there were things that we could have done better and all of that. I think I learned a lot. Rob taught me some things, and Allie was very smart. Allie, she's an incredibly brilliant woman, and she explained some things to me, and so it was all in all a really happy experience. A lot of pressure. I mean, very often we were out there in the cold on the water, and Rob, an incredible trooper. I mean, he would go into that T-shirt, this rowing shirt, like it was summertime, but it was like 30 degrees, man.
Oh.
And he was rowing his ass off, and he was just great. He never complained. He wasn't a problem at all with anything, and he just gave it 110%. And I thoroughly enjoyed the experience in the movie, and it all worked out kind of fine. And I was very happy with it. It was a very good first experience. And after that, sometime later, I made a Western with Rob and Bill Paxton.
Yeah, Frank and Jesse. I remember, because I remember that on HBO. And I got to tell you, here on Red River Podcast, where we talk movies, music, and pop culture, Bill Paxton is like God. Like he's like one of our favorites ever. Like his filmography. I've met his son. I mean, like he is just like everything that guy has done, from Frailty to like his whole filmography. He is like one of our favorites. So what was it like to work with Bill?
Bill was Mr. Enthusiasm. He was really great. He loves other actors, absolutely loves them. His relationship with what's his name, Luke Askew, right? That was it. That was the gunman in Frank and Jesse. He was in, Luke Askew was in so many films. He was in Green Beret with John Wayne. He was he'd been in some absolutely terrific movies, and so Bill was just thrilled to be able to talk to him and spend time with him. And I thought working with Bill and Rob were terrific. They both had two different approaches, about who they were as actors and what they expected for the future. Bill was really filled with making contributions all the time. He always had another idea and another way to do things, and it was he really made it terrific. I enjoyed that movie a lot. I think the cinematography in that movie I'm very proud of. I think the performance Rob gave in Frank and Jesse is a terrific performance. I mean, there are some wonderful moments in there. There's moments. I love it when he takes the gun away from Bob Ford, and tosses the knife across the dinner table.
Yeah. I think you would say meet the twins.
When he gets on the train and he goes, meet the twins. He was, Rob, I thought, really pulled all of that off, and the little bit of the madness of Jesse. I think he did a wonderful job. I think Rob did a terrific job, and I thought so did Bill. And I think some of the photography there is just wonderful. So I'm awfully pleased with that movie.
What's it like? Because I know that some of your movies have been released through HBO. Now, growing up, HBO, like, there was a lot of movies that came through there that we would see, like, primarily on there. I always remember, it's like, oh, we saw this on HBO. So what was the relationship like with HBO in the 90s? Because that, and I think, what was the other one? Extreme Justice came out on via HBO as well?
Extreme Justice was supposed to be a theatrical feature. I think what happens, in some of the cases with these movies, is that the star power in those movies wasn't enough to justify a theatrical expense of release.
Okay.
So I think that's it. And now that's just part of it. Or they think the movie wasn't strong enough. I'm not blaming it on actors by any means. I think the decision was on some of those movies. I know that Extreme Justice was supposed to be a theatrical release, and I didn't direct it, but I think the story was very good,
very good story. Yeah, great story, great, like,
very much. Yeah, and Scott, I thought there was some great stuff in there. And I thought it was a very exciting movie, and very dark,
very dark. A great cast. Like, I love Lou Diamond Phillips. Coming off of Young Guns, probably around that time, 1 and 2. Yaphet Kotto.
Yaphet was great in that. Yaphet was terrific in that.
Legendary Yaphet Kotto.
Yeah, and you really had a good combination in there, and so. I thought I really liked the movie a lot. I really did like the movie a lot, and I'm not sure what the reasons were. It was it's hard for me to say. I didn't know the producers that well at that point, so I'm not sure that I got much inside information. But I enjoyed working on writing the script, and I certainly enjoyed seeing the movie. I thought the movie really was, to me, I thought really very good and very provocative.
As a filmmaker that went through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, once VHS started becoming a thing, like, what was that? What was the atmosphere like? Did you feel like theatrical was like, I mean, everyone wanted theatrical back then, and but like, did you see like another life through video?
I didn't. For me individually, I didn't focus on that very much. I didn't think much about future residuals and future life of the movies. I wanted to see the theatrical release, most of all, obviously.
Yeah.
I saw it several times, but most of the time, the films that I worked on, for whatever reasons, were sometimes because of the limited budget, it wasn't enough of a spectacle to justify the extra millions it was to put a movie out in the theaters. So I didn't feel that. I felt there was a need for product. So you felt good about what was going on because it gave more people a taste for movies with video and VCRs and all of that stuff. And so I thought more and more product was being done. But I also think that it was, I think the industry was changing. It's always been a changing industry. Now I'm not sure where we're shaking out now, because there's still, obviously, I think production still involves pandemic thinking, so they're very careful about how they go about production. I hear that, I don't know all the details, but I think insurance factors play heavily on the budgets of movies these days. So I think there's a lot that's making things transformational, and obviously they have no idea what box office is going to be like anymore.
Right.
I know that their theaters are opening again, but I think there's limited patronage, right?
I think so. I think really now it's like a lot of streaming sites, so it'll go to Netflix, it'll go to Amazon Prime, it'll go to
They keep saying a lot of things are going to be opening back up by July and stuff, to see how that goes. I know in New York. So,
but I do like the way HBO Max is handling it, though. Like they're getting those premieres, they're still getting those premieres. So it's like, you want to watch Mortal Kombat in the movie theaters or at home on your big TV. So at least you have that option.
Right.
I wanted to touch on what you were doing now real quick. Because I know that you have some finished screenplays as well as some films in development.
Well, actually, I'm actually feeling quite excited about a bunch of things. And it's just, look, it just shows you being the Energizer Bunny is not a bad way to live. I just keep writing all the time. I've written a couple of scripts recently that's getting some attention. I know I've got a couple of producers who want to make them and have made some deals with me to try to make them. I think one is very close to, actually, with a very significant director, and one has just gotten a very significant director. I think I can mention it, but I wrote a story. I'm very interested in the African-American experience, especially during World War II. And because I don't think people know the history of it that much. So I started off by writing a script that I'd wanted to write for 25 years.
Wow.
Which is called The Red Ball Express. And Danny even helped me with that. But in 1944, after we landed in Normandy, most people know that Patton and the Third Army Corps raced across France and headed to Germany, and he wanted to get to Germany as fast as possible. So he went 286 miles across France and occupied, German territory, basically. And when he reached almost the border of Germany, he ran so far and so fast that we couldn't supply him. He had no food, no fuel, no ammo. And literally, as he reached the German border, he stalled. They couldn't move. They didn't have food, they didn't have fuel, and they ran out of ammo. And they were really in deep doo-doo. I mean, they were really, they were doomed. And the military, U.S. military, tried to figure out, how do we save this guy, all the Third Army? How do we save them? The weather was bad. They couldn't fly supplies to them, so that wouldn't work. most of the rail lines had been destroyed in the bombing in order to invade France. So that they couldn't get rail lines out to them. So how do you get to them? Well, of course, the one thing that somebody said was, we've got 40,000 trucks sitting on the Normandy beaches, which is what was shipped over, by Eisenhower, and it's mostly like 90% of the truck units are people by African American soldiers, and who cares about them anyway? So why don't we see if we can get a bunch of those trucks to drive without any help, without any support, without any air support, without any military, see if they can drive as fast as they can and get the supplies to Patton as much as they can do. And it really, in essence, was a bit of a suicide run.
Wow.
And these kids who had no military training, most of them weren't even allowed to carry guns. So they were basically mechanics and truck drivers. They were assigned to go basically save Patton's butt.
Wow.
And so it was an amazing story to me. These kids got together, they souped up their trucks, they put guns on them, they put machine guns and anti-aircraft cannons on them, and they basically went off on their own, using their own wit, their own daring, their own courage, in an attempt to save Patton, which if he had been wiped out, the war would have gone on 5 more years. Everybody admits it, and we could have been pushed back to the sea. So basically, these kids did these incredible runs of 276 miles to bring food and supplies and ammunition to Patton. It's a great story of heroism and courage, and the fact that we're standing here today pretty much in a large way because of what they did in those days, in those 4 months. And so to me, it's an incredibly wonderful story, and I've wanted to tell it for the longest time. And now it seems I wrote the script, which it came out really well. And now we're talking to the guy a wonderful director who directed Act of Valor, Scott Waugh. And he seems very fond of the script. And so if we can work it out that he would do it, that would be, attach him as the director of the movie would be fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm excited about that. And then while I was doing that research and other research on African-American heroes during the war, I came across some wonderful stories that Patton had, for whatever his reasons were, a little bit later on, had put together what is called the 761st Tank Brigade. It was an all-black tank brigade. And they were the most daring, the most resourceful, the most courageous group of kids that you ever could imagine. And they did what most tankers wouldn't dream of doing, and they took on overwhelming odds, and they became known as the Black Panthers. Now, obviously, I can't use that title.
Sure.
So I won't call it the Black Panthers, but I wrote a script about their exploits, and I'm calling it Patton's Panthers because that's who they were. They were his unit, 761st. You can look them up. They were his unit, and I'm very excited about that script, and I have some people and some very strong, almost A-level directors, or a couple of very strong directors and an A-level director who may be interested in taking over the project. So I'm very excited about that. So I've got a couple of these World War II projects.
Awesome.
Very
that I'm
cool.
very excited about.
That's amazing. That you're still doing it. You know, I love that. I mean, your career is immense, and I don't want to keep you much longer. I just wanted to ask you about one thing now that we got like what you're doing now. The movie that we could close on is Steele Justice. It's like, that's our movie.
Marty Kove.
I got to talk to you about Marty Kove, man. We love him. I mean, he was just in a movie called VFW.
He's having a great second act right now with the Cobra Kai and everything.
How about third act? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I mean, just give us a little something about the movie.
Marty is a treat and a half. I enjoy Marty tremendously. He's a terrific guy, a terrific human being. He is Mr. Show Business as far as I'm concerned. I mean, once he took me to some wonderful cowboy events, because we often talked about Hole in the Wall Gang and other things that he did, and so he loves westerns more than anything. And we talked about westerns all the time. We watched westerns together a lot. And working with him, there was nothing he wouldn't try in Steel Justice, and it was just a balls out movie where there was a lot of action. And
yes,
and,
I mean, great cast. Like it was like a who's who. Like you had like
Joe
Al,
Campanella's in there,
yeah. You had Al, like the ultimate like henchman.
Right.
Just completely, yeah. It was so cool.
It was that was quite an experience, but I'm trying to think if I can remember any incidents so you could end on something kind of funny. But he was all I can say is, well, there was a point when he gave me I think it's a birthday present. He had a huge basically outdoor movie card, gigantic. I mean, I'm sure it was like 6 or 8 feet tall, and it was for the Italian release of A Fistful of Dollars.
Okay.
So it's a giant photograph of Clint in the serape and the pistol and all of that stuff.
We've come full circle.
and it's all Fistful of Dollars. So he gives me that in one package, wrapped it, in paper and all, in color paper, and saying happy birthday. And it's a great, wonderful poster.
Yeah.
And next to it is another poster, and it's of course of him. So
yeah.
and it was I forget which movie it was. I don't think it was Steel Justice, but I know he had most of his shirt off, and I forget which movie it was. But the idea of like, here I got these two posters side by side, about 16 feet of male pulchritude.
Yeah.
And Clint is on one side, and Marty Kove with his shirt off is on the other side.
Yes.
And I go like, this is my birthday. So
that's awesome. Well, listen, Robert Boris, thank you for sharing some of these stories with us.
Yes.
Like when we first looked at like everything, we're like, this is super overwhelming. So we had to do some bullet points here. But I mean, anyone listening, his credits go way beyond anything that we covered. So thank you for doing it. And
thank you so much.
I'll let you know as soon as I put it out. And from there, that's it. It was great meeting you. Thank you for making these movies that we love, and looking forward to what you have in the future.
Red Bull Express and Patton's Panthers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
When they're out, come on back.
Yeah.
We'd love to talk to you about them again.
All right.
I would love to talk to you too.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Guys.
Later, Bob.